Do you feel that as a sector we're a bit more comfortable now with curricula, building our own curriculum in our settings? What do you feel the progress has been made?
Well, it's an interesting question, and we are at an interesting point in time, particularly if you take that as a reference point. And that was during the time when the EYFS was still in process, as it were. And I think certainly philosophically we were at a very different place. I think the understanding of curricula has improved and deepened, but I think we are still on a journey. And I think, as with any change in behaviour, you have interesting variations of that, where some people go very extreme, some people revert back to what they know, and generally, step by step, we get to a different point. So I think in a lot of ways we're still in that process. I think the EYFS, is now a year and a half it's been embedded. I think it was a sort of, in some ways, a slow burn seismic shift, particularly around that idea of focusing on the concept of curriculum, the what is learned, and the sort of essence of that. And I think we are still moving in that direction. I think, and I possibly talked about this 3 years ago, I think the one of the biggest tensions is that tension between the what and the how, and how they sometimes get conflated. So the pedagogical, cut that. So the pedagogy, or the pedagogical repertoire, the process, is not the curriculum. And one of the projects I'm involved in with a group of schools in south of England is putting together some materials about how we structure that. And I worked with them quite closely, and it was really interesting when we talked about curriculum progression. They would almost, to start with, just slide back into activities. And I kept saying, no, that's an activity, that's not the learning. So being able to define out and delineate the learning that you want to take place, which, let's face it, is dull and dry and a bit dusty. It's the pedagogy that makes it exciting. But that's a really important process, because that helps us understand why we're doing what we're doing. So I feel quite confident about the direction things are taking. I think some of the thinking around it and some of the approaches people are using are really interesting. And as ever with the early years community, there's a whole unique diversity of how that's being addressed, and it's always a, whenever you work with early years educators, it's always a privilege and a surprise to see just how creative and responsive and dynamic they are about it. So I think we're in an interesting place on that journey. I think the other factor to throw in there is obviously we can't get away from the fact that the children who are going into earlier settings now are this mini COVID generation. They're children who were born or grew up under COVID. Their whole enculturation of the world, their whole neurological development happened in very, very extreme, atypical circumstances. So those children are now in our EYFS settings, and their experiences are very different. And I do think, particularly at the moment, we have a very, very direct responsibility to make sure we ameliorate some of the impact of that. Otherwise, we are storing up another pandemic in years to come of children who haven't aligned with the world in the way that they would have done previously. And I think that's a really salient issue at the moment.